How's it going, everybody? When it comes to the FNAF fan games that I've covered on this channel before, for the most part, most of them have been relatively scary to a degree. Now, don't get it twisted. I haven't been that scared by most of what I've played on here, but it would be ignorant to ignore the fact that the horror element of these games is definitely a major aspect of them. With that in mind, if you know me, you already know that I don't really give a shit about the horror in these FNAF adjacent projects. Sure, sometimes it can be cool or, well, even scary, but I normally go into these games looking at the gameplay first and everything else second. It's just what I personally care about, but that is obviously different for everybody. Anyway, the game we're going to be talking about today isn't actually the least scary FNAF fan game of all time. I was using a little bit of exaggeration in the title there. However, I would argue out of all the games I've covered on this channel before, it is probably trying to be scary the least. That is up for debate though, considering I've played shit like Five Nights at Sonic's before. Despite the spooky factor taking a back seat for other aspects of the game, that doesn't bother me at all. In fact, just like the title says, the game we're going to be talking about today is pretty definitively my favorite FNAF fan game ever made. Like, seriously, I can't think of another one I've played before that was this much fun and just hit all the markers I look for in a FNAF project. So what's the deal then? How was one of the least scary FNAF fan games I have ever played actually my favorite of all time? Well, strap in, folks, as I take you through everything this phenomenal experience has to offer. And I mean everything. Sorry about the runtime. This is Playtime with Percy. Wait, why the fuck am I still in this sewer? Previously on, I think I'm in a sewer or something? I don't really remember anymore. Granny video. Now for the thrilling conclusion, right after this sponsor. Dun dun dun! This video is sponsored by Raycon. Alright, so Raycon decided to sponsor me again, which is great because this product is genuinely awesome. I already told you all about their amazing, no fuss, best-selling everyday earbuds, but believe it or not, there are even more features I can go over. They are just that feature-rich. For example, I never went over how great the battery life is on these things. Other brands of wireless earbuds for a similar or maybe even higher price often have some pretty weak battery lives, which is always extremely annoying. With Raycon's everyday earbuds, I can listen to my favorite girly pop music for up to 32 hours straight, meaning I can go my entire day using them and never have to worry about the battery dying. That's not all, folks, because Raycon's everyday earbuds also have a super cool feature that I've never seen on any other pair of earbuds before personally: multi-point connectivity. With multi-point connectivity, you can connect your Raycon everyday earbuds to 2 different devices at the same time. If you're doing something on your phone and PC back and forth, for example, you can stay connected with these same pair of earbuds for all of it. Super cool addition to the product that you really don't see too often. I've also been loving these cool protective case covers. First of all, check out this design. It complements the earbuds color perfectly, and it's so stylish. And not only do these look great, they support wireless charging, so I don't even have to take them out of the protective cover to get 90 minutes of battery in just 10 minutes of charging time. With a 30-day happiness guarantee, you really have nothing to lose trying out Raycon. Go to buyraycon.com/yeah today to get 20 to 50% off site-wide. That's right, you'll get up to 50% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/yeah. Thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Wasn't I supposed to be doing something here? Ooh, that was weird. I'm sure this won't have any repercussions for the yeah cinematic universe down the line. Time to lawyer up, baby. I'm sorry? You broke a written contract agreement, dude. You're in deep shit now. A contract that, let me remind you, you signed on my behalf. Too bad. Sponsor Parrot is seeking one longer FNAF video right now to make up for the losses in FNAF Month. What? If he wanted to settle something with me, he could have just come to see me himself. As the legal representative for Mr. Parrot, I've advised him not to speak with you until his demands are met. Since when did you become a lawyer? I really don't trust you as a lawyer. Since right now. Enough chit-chat though. Time for you to get to work. Ta-ta! Whew. Well then, I guess it could be worse. Although being sued by a parrot and your blue clone is definitely up there. Anyway, before we get into all the Playtime with Percy stuff, I might as well try to catch everybody up to speed on what's been happening with me and this channel. For starters, if it wasn't obvious by the lawsuit, FNAF Month did not end up going as planned. Sorry about that. Hopefully this video will make up for it though. It should be a fun one. Second, we reached 650,000 subscribers a while ago, which you all probably know was the Granny video subscriber goal. I am still going to uphold my end of the deal, don't worry, but I want to make sure that video is solid, so it probably won't come out until near the end of the year. In the meantime, I intend to actually try and upload consistently for the remainder of the year, so we'll see how that goes. Finally, subscribe. That isn't mandatory, but you should just pretend it is anyway. Anyway, enough yapping, let's talk about my favorite FNAF fan game of all time, Playtime with Percy. Alright, there is a surprising amount of shit I have to get through before I can actually talk about this game. My history with Playtime with Percy goes back to before the game even came out, and the lore keeps going even after the game came out, so we definitely have some groundwork to cover here. This isn't actually the first time I've mentioned this game's existence on my channel before. It actually got a brief mention in my old video on upcoming FNAF fan games that was ages ago. It's one of the only games from that video to actually come out and not get cancelled or delayed indefinitely, so that's something. Kicking myself every single day that I gave an entire section of that video to fucking Grizzlies 2 instead of Playtime with Percy. That's an L I'm gonna have to take to my grave, I think. I think at the time, as optimistic as I was with the project, I truly didn't see the vision with Playtime with Percy yet. I liked the creator of the game, Fazzy Funbear, so even if I didn't fully get it yet, I had pretty strong faith that I eventually would. The game finally dropped sometime last year, and I actually streamed it live the day it came out with Fazzy himself. I also leaked one of the custom-made animatronics the millisecond the game came out in my stream thumbnail because, I am very smart. Anyway, I played the game, enjoyed the fuck out of it, and then played it even more off-stream for a few hours over the next couple days. At that point, it fully clicked for me that this was my favorite FNAF fan game of all time. I unironically enjoyed this game more than any official FNAF game, which isn't a jab at FNAF or anything, but instead a testament to how quality Playtime with Percy truly is. You may not get it now just by looking at the game, but by the end of this video, you will understand just how peak it actually is. However, before we can actually talk about Percy in depth, there's kind of an elephant in the room that we have to go over first. It isn't a big elephant or anything, more like the size of that one tiny ass elephant from a Canadian PSA I saw constantly when I was 5, but an elephant nonetheless. Alright, so Playtime with Percy isn't technically a FNAF fan game anymore. Sure, it was released as a FNAF fan game and advertised as one as well, but over the last year, Fazzy and the team have been trying to distance the Percy IP from the FNAF IP. The original release of the game only had a couple FNAF references that have all been removed in later updates. So as it stands, Playtime with Percy actually has nothing tying it to the FNAF brand legally. I am entirely behind this decision, because I think FNAF-inspired games should really just become an actual genre at this point, considering that, outside of the fanverse, the actual FNAF IP isn't giving us any classic FNAF experiences anymore. I think tying an entire genre of gameplay down to only being represented in fan games isn't doing any favors to pushing the genre forward at all. So fuck it. If the game doesn't have any FNAF characters, locations, or anything linking it to the specific copyrighted FNAF stuff, who cares? Let it be an original thing. Not like anyone actually cared when the Walton Files did the exact same thing, minus the game part. Which isn't a ding against the Walton Files or anything. I'm just trying to say, there's room for FNAF adjacent IPs to exist, and trying to create some weird stigma against it is insane. Anyway, all of this yapping actually has a point, which has to do with why this video even exists in the first place. You see, even before Percy's came out, I have been pushing Fazzy to put this damn game on Steam. Even before it was officially not a FNAF fan game, I saw the potential audience it could gain if it was on a more popular platform than GameJolt. Fazzy seemed against the idea for a while, but started warming up to it this year more than before. I decided to use this to my advantage and created a deal with Fazzy in a livestream chat of all places. The deal was simple. Fazzy puts Playtime with Percy on Steam, I will finally make a video about it. It took a little bit, but Fazzy eventually gave in and put the game on Steam. Now, it isn't actually out on Steam yet, but a build of the game is on Steam for beta testers, which I have graciously been given access to. So, for this video, I played Percy's again on the Steam beta release. Not only was I due for another playthrough anyway, but doing this reawakened my love for this game and made writing this video significantly easier. So, I have no idea when Percy's is actually coming out on Steam, but please go and download it when it comes out. It's going to be completely free, just like the Game Jolt version, so you literally have nothing to lose trying it. Not sponsored or anything, I am just a D1 glazer for this game. Okay, with all of that out of the way, I think it's finally time to start talking about the actual game. Strap in again, everybody, because we're going over everything that Playtime with Percy has to offer to truly find out why it's my favorite FNAF fan game of all time. Or I guess I should say former FNAF fan game, which would give the actual title back to Tyke & Sons. Something about that seems right. Anyway, let's talk about the funny dog animatronic game. Here we go. I can't think of a better way to start off this major portion of the video than to poorly explain the plot of Playtime with Percy to you all. So let's do that. You play as Nick, a generic white guy who used to work at an entertainment center for kids and families called Percy's Playhouse. Now, according to the Playtime with Percy page on the Five Nights at Freddy's wiki, aka the absolute best source for information on this story I could possibly be pulling from, Nick was a hard worker when he was employed by Percy Poodle & Co. If he was such a good worker, you're probably wondering why I'm referring to his employment status in the past tense. Well, unfortunately, Nick's ass got fired for unexplained reasons. Maybe the boss just really hates having good employees at his establishment. Him and Mr. B should definitely link up. I think they have a lot in common actually. So, like any American citizen who gets laid off in the current job market, Nick is pretty fucking screwed. He's got legal problems, debt to pay, and no way to tackle either of them. Our friend Nick here is boned. However, just as things seem over for Nick, his previous boss reaches out to him like the fucking Mercy Overwatch gif on Discord tenor search or whatever the fuck. The boss gives Nick a call and offers him one final temporary work position at the Playhouse. The boss is planning to demolish the building at the end of the week due to its sudden closure, and he wants Nick to act as an off-the-books security guard during the nights leading up to the destruction of the building. There are tons of valuables still in the building after all. The boss wouldn't want anything to be stolen. Nick, literally being in the worst position of all time and having next to no other options, agrees to come back for the week as a security guard for a whopping $250. Our man is rolling in the big bucks now. With Nick agreeing to come back to his job for the temporary position, Nick heads on over to Percy's Playhouse to start his first security gig shift of many. A security gig in a building full of old animatronics. I'm sure this has never led to anything bad ever in the history of media, actually. Nick is gonna be fine, don't even worry about it, guys. Once the intro story segment is over, you're given the option of playing a short tutorial to get familiar with the game and its basic mechanics, or you can just hop right into the first night. Even though at this point I already know the mechanics of Playtime with Percy like the back of my hand, I still love to do the tutorial every time I start a new save file. It's nothing crazy really, but it's just a cute little extra that adds a lot to the overall experience. The tutorial gets you familiar with the two main devices that you'll be using during the course of your night gameplay. That being the Pal Percy and the Pal Boy. The Pal Percy is a small, Tamagotchi-like device with 3 different games you can play on it. In order to complete a night and move on to the next one, you must fill up the happiness bar at the bottom of the Pal Percy. Each of the 3 games will contribute points to the bar until it's completely full, at which point the night immediately ends. Unlike your typical, more traditional FNAF games, Playtime with Percy's night completion requirements are not based on time survived at all, and are instead based on how fast it takes you to fill up the happiness bar. So you can kind of think of this game like Pizza Sim, but instead of just waiting for boring ass tasks to finish without much control on the player's end, you actually have to play the little mini games in order to make progress in each night. I always thought the task-based system of Pizza Sim had a lot of potential if it was more involved, and this game absolutely scratches that itch for me. Because the completion of each night is based on your own management of dealing with the Pal Percy, that means one player could take 50 seconds to complete the first night, while another player could take 2 minutes to complete the first night. This makes the game super speed runnable, since you can maximize every little action you take to make your time faster and faster. I've never been much of a speedrunner myself, but that doesn't change the fact that this system is super cool and really great for the game's replayability. The 3 minigames on the Pal Percy are super simple and quick, making them easy to learn and not annoying to play over and over again. There's one where you need to catch 3 pieces of meat falling from the sky in a basket, one where you need to spam W and S on the keyboard to make water drops go into a dog bowl, and finally, one where you need to throw a ball at Pal multiple times without accidentally throwing the ball somewhere else. It's not like it's hard to do so or anything, but you have to get good at each of these 3 minigames. You can't just play the same minigame over and over to make progress on the happiness bar. Eventually, the pal Percy will force you to play the minigame that you've been ignoring, and you can't play the same one twice in a row. If I had to rank these minigames and how I personally feel about them, my favorite is the ball one because it's really fucking easy to do quickly and it's fun to get good at. The middle one would be the catching meat one. It's not hard or annoying or anything, and it's probably the quickest of all the minigames to be fair. It's just kind of boring and way less engaging than the ball minigame. By far, my least favorite of these minigames is the water bowl one. Holy shit, fuck the water bowl one! This isn't even the fault of the game. I just suck ass at quickly pressing W and S back and forth, and sometimes the water is just really stubborn and won't come out as quickly as you think it should be. I do think that's part of the charm and challenge of it though, so I can't really say anything too bad about it for real. However, I can tell you how dumb I am. That's easy. When I first played this game, and for a while after for some reason, I assumed the best strategy to do the water minigame was to use both hands and to put one finger from each hand on one of the 2 keys. This was insanely stupid and just made me more vulnerable when the minigame was over and I had to move my right hand back to the mouse. I really don't know what I was thinking. Top 5 smartest moments for me of all time, definitely. Up there with the thumbnail thing from earlier for sure. Getting into the flow of completing these Pal Percy minigames over and over again actually gets really addicting, and it's such a blast when you're on a good roll with them. It's also insanely fun to try, and very easy to speedrun these earlier nights where the threats take a little bit longer to show up, since you can pretty much ignore everything and just try to fill up the happiness bar as fast as possible without taking any breaks to check the cameras or defend yourself. Speaking of the cameras, the other device you're given is the Palboy, which is a camera system with a built-in radar system as well. Like I said earlier, this game isn't very scary or anything, so the cameras don't really have any cool lighting setups or dark spots like your normal FNAF cameras. But besides that, I would say they get the job done. Every character that can go onto a specific camera room can stack on top of each other as well, so that's also really good. It always sucks when the cameras are set up in a way that don't make that possible, so I gotta give the game props for that. Besides that though, this camera system really isn't anything to write home about. In fact, it's actually insanely useless for like half of the entire main game. Nights 1, 2, and 3 can be beaten completely without using the cameras, which is always kinda lame. The characters that do use the cameras are good when they actually get introduced, I just wish they were spread out a little bit more so the cameras were actually useful for the first half of the game. We can pretty safely ignore talking about camera stuff until night 4 though, so don't forget this game has cameras when I eventually bring them up again. Despite the cameras being entirely useless now, I still think the early gameplay loop is strong enough to carry the first half of the game without many issues. It does let you get super familiar with how the Pal Percy works at least, which is definitely a plus. With that out of the way, we can finally get into the actual cool part of the tutorial. After you get familiar with the Pal Percy and the Pal Boy, the game will introduce you to the first 2 animatronics you'll have to defend yourself from during night 1. However, it doesn't just throw the actual animatronics at you when you learn that way, no. Instead, the game will send cardboard dummies at you that act the same as the 2 characters, but can't jump scare you if you fuck up. Not only does this do a really good job at teaching the player about these early game mechanics in an interactive way, it's also just insanely stylish, and it fits the game's tone very well. I talk about the 2 different starting animatronics and their mechanics now, but then we'd unironically have nothing to talk about for night 1. Like, seriously, the tutorial and the first night have identical gameplay mechanics. Same amount of happiness to fill, same useless cameras, same 2 animatronic mechanics from the tutorial. If you finish the tutorial, you know everything you need to know to complete the first night in this game. So, let's save the animatronics and their mechanics for the first night discussion and get into that right now. Like I mentioned previously, Night 1, or as it's referred to in the game, Monday, only has 2 animatronic threats for the player to worry about. Other than those 2 threats, Monday is really just about focusing on completing your Pal Percy tasks and getting out of there as fast as possible. Since it's so early in the game, the aggression level in the animatronics is very low, so it really lets you get a grasp on the basics outside of the tutorial environment. The overall lack of danger during Monday is also really good because a new player may not understand how useless the cameras are at this point in the game. This lets them track the animatronics around the building and waste some time without it really being a big deal. Once one of the animatronics is about to attack, you'll hear some rumbling in the vent that the animatronic is in. Both of these starting animatronics can attack you from either side of the room, so you can't just rely on which side an animatronic comes out of to know how to react to them. You do need to know which one it is visually. When one of these two animatronics is in the office, the game gives you enough time to see them first before they attack you, so you don't have to look at the cameras to see which animatronic is about to enter a vent to be able to react to what's coming in your office. When one of these two animatronics actually enters your office through a vent, a loud stinger cue will play, letting you know that something has entered your office and you have to react as fast as possible. Deal with the threat accordingly, and they will leave your office and not jump scare you. Fail to deal with the animatronic on time, and it's game over. Pretty simple system. But once more threats get added on top of these basic ones, the gameplay loop really starts to come together in a magical way. I've talked so much about these first two animatronics, but haven't even introduced them or their actual mechanics yet. So let's do that. First up, we have Charlie Cat. Charlie is a cat. Wow, shocker. If I were to rank all the animatronics in this game, he would probably be on the lower end, but he's still pretty good. I think parts of his design are a little too busy and could have probably been done a little better. Specifically, the polka dots on his pants look kind of ugly, but I like his theming a lot, and I have to give props to these designs for actually having clothes. In my old ass video on Mary's Arcade, I made a whole stink about how I thought it was cool that the animatronics in that game had outfits like actual animatronic bands in real life. Not every character has clothes in Playtime with Percy, but the ones who do I think have very fun outfits. I'm also a huge fan of the art direction in this game, giving all the normal animatronics white, pupilless eyes. I promise I am not biased in any way when it comes to anthropomorphic animals with white eyes and no pupils. Why would I ever be biased about that? Nope, not me at all, couldn't be me. Also, Charlie's jump scare has him throwing confetti in the air, which is funny as fuck, and I do think that makes me like him slightly more than I would otherwise. Charlie's gameplay mechanic is really simple, but also very effective in the context of the entire gameplay loop. You see, Charlie Cat hates electronics. This is because he's kinda full of himself, and likes the spotlight a little too much. He'd rather you be looking at him than your stupid pal boy or pal Percy. I mean, who needs to progress in the game anyway? I'd rather look at this clown cat thing. This is reflected in his gameplay mechanic perfectly, because if you have either of your devices up when he enters the office, it's game over for you. Bro would rather have you dead and rotting than playing a fucking Tamagotchi. Professional hater. I can't say he isn't committed to the bit. Like I mentioned previously, so much of this game has to do with filling up the happiness bar on the pal Percy to complete the nights. So having a character that literally wastes your time and halts your progress is genius. You can get into so many close call scenarios where you're almost done with your tasks, but Charlie rears his ugly head and forces you to sit and wait for a little bit. A lot of the mechanics in this game are based around taking you away from the pal Percy and forcing you to do something else, making progression harder and harder the more animatronics that get added to the game. However, our second and final Monday animatronic actually goes against this design philosophy completely and forces you to keep your electronics up when she enters the office. This is Mother Moose, a caring mother figure at Percy's playhouse that does her best to keep all the children entertained. Sometimes she tells the kids stories to keep them distracted, but that's only effective for so long. To be the best mom in the world, you obviously have to just throw an iPad at your kid. Mother Moose is a certified iPad mom, and would rather you be distracted looking at electronics than looking at her. She enters the office the same way Charlie Cat does, but if you have your electronics down for too long when she's in the office, she'll jump scare you. This creates a pretty simple to understand base gameplay loop for the start of the game. If Charlie Cat enters the office, make sure your electronics are down, and if Mother Moose enters the office, do the opposite. Mother Moose's mechanic is the ultimate double-edged sword, because being able to make progress in the night when she's in the office is great, but there are some threats that must be dealt with in the office itself, and you just can't until she leaves. The same thing applies to Charlie. Sometimes it's beneficial to have him in the office if you need to deal with something outside of the cameras or pal Percy. It gives both of these starting characters their pros and cons right off the bat, and I think that's really cool. When it comes to Mother Moose's design, I think she's definitely better than Charlie Cat. A moose is such an interesting animal to do for a game like this, and as a Canadian, I gotta respect it. I mean, our police ride on moose or something? I'm pretty sure that's what that is, right? The more simple clothing design for Mother Moose is also a huge plus that I think naturally fits the overall design very well. She also just kind of looks funny in a good way. Take that however you want. Monday will have these two animatronics attacking you only a few times, maybe even never if you're fast enough with your tasks. it gets new players fully used to their very simple to understand gameplay mechanics, which is obviously the goal of the tutorial and the first night. Now, future nights can easily add more stuff to the gameplay loop without losing the player entirely. And trust me, hella shit is about to get added as we move forward. Once the happiness bar has been fully completed, the first night ends and we get to move forward in the game. However, we aren't just gonna move straight to Tuesday. We aren't done with Monday just yet. Every night in Playtime with Percy ends with a post-night section. Each of these post-night sections involves dealing with one of the various animatronics in the building. The first of these is centered around our good pal, Charlie Cat, who has come back for revenge after I called his pants messy. All of these post-night sections have wildly different premises, so you never know what you're gonna get into before the section actually starts. I'd love to just jump straight into the first post-night section here. However, there's something important about this game that I feel like I should probably talk a little bit about before we move forward. Guys, we gotta talk about the Playtime with Percy art style. Alright, so obviously Playtime with Percy's art style is very different from the majority of FNAF fan games and other FNAF-inspired projects. I think it's objectively a little more playful and goofy looking than anything remotely close to being scary, but I think that was probably part of the intention. Most FNAF fan games that use fully 2D art are kinda scuffed and a little ugly looking. However, Playtime with Percy does a lot of things with its art and animation that makes the game look way better than its competition. For starters, the jumpscare animations in this game were fully animated in Blender, even though they're obviously 2D drawings. This gives the movement a kind of 3D feel to it, which works really well. The other animations in this game outside of the jump scares also look really good. I especially like the little animation for Charlie and Mother Moose entering and leaving the office fence. They look really smooth. The actual art of this game kinda looks like a high-budget Scratch FNAF fan game. That's the best way I can describe it. That's not a diss or anything either. I think a lot of those games look really charming, and so does this one. I don't think it's going to be everyone's cup of tea, but I've definitely really grown to love and appreciate how this game looks. I could see it being a turnoff for some though, which I understand to an extent. However, Playtime with Percy has so much more going for it than just the art style, so even if someone really doesn't like how it looks, I'm sure they'll enjoy how it plays. I also think its unique art style definitely helps it stand apart from a lot of the other FNAF fan games that come out now that all kind of try to look a similar way. That really isn't a bad thing, but having a wildly different visual style from everything else around you definitely helps when it comes to being recognizable. That's the one thing you gotta give Percy. It'd be hard to confuse this game with any other major FNAF fan game just by taking a quick glance at it. So yeah, I really don't have any huge problems with how this game looks, but it's such a big part of its identity that ignoring it entirely would be silly. I would actually be interested in hearing everyone at home's thoughts about Playtime with Percy's art style in the comments, especially from those who have never heard of the game until now. I'm curious to see what everyone's opinions are. Oh yeah, I'll obviously go into it way more as we talk about each of the animatronics individually, but I think the character design in this game is really solid. Maybe not as much for the human characters. Nick and the boss are kinda boring looking, but the majority of the animatronics in Playtime with Percy look great. The pixel art on the pal Percy is also really fucking cute. I couldn't end this little section without mentioning that. Anyway, that's really all I wanted to say on this topic. Let's get back on track here and get into the first post-night section. Part of Nick's duties on his security job is to do some last-minute chores around the building before it gets demolished on Friday. Since Percy's Playhouse literally won't even exist by the end of the week, one of these tasks is to auction off each of the animatronics for money on this universe's eBay equivalent. For this post-night section, Auction Automation, Nick must successfully auction off each of the animatronics without getting caught by Charlie Cat, who's patrolling the area trying to catch you in the act. Maybe it isn't the best idea for Nick to be trying to sell off these killer animatronics in the same fucking building where they just tried to kill him, but you know, Nick accepted this job for $250, so I don't think being smart is his thing. Anyway, here's how this minigame works. You're stationed in front of a computer with the auction page open that you can interact with completely. Each of the animatronics will have a listed price that needs to be met in order to successfully lock in a deal. People will submit offers and you have to keep rejecting them until they match the listed price. To reject an offer, you must enter a set of numbers that it gives you. It starts off only giving you 2 numbers to enter, but around the halfway point in the minigame, it will increase to 4 numbers. Every set of numbers you enter will increase the person's bid offer by $100. Keep entering numbers until the bid matches the listed amount, at which point you can lock in the sale. Do this for each of the animatronics, and the post-night section will end. Like any good FNAF-style minigame like this, there are plenty of things trying to slow you down from completing your goal. For starters, occasionally the computer will lose access to the internet, and you need to click on the correct internet name to reconnect and continue working. On top of that, ads and pop-ups will occasionally flood the screen that you have to exit out of to continue making progress. Funny enough, One of these pop-ups used to be the only direct FNAF reference in the entire game, before being removed in a patch. While all that stuff is going on with the computer, Charlie Cat will occasionally walk by you and try to jump scare you. If you hear his footsteps, you need to stop what you're doing and hide under the table. Once under the table, you will need to wait for Charlie to walk past you before you can come back up and continue making progress. Once the halfway mark of the minigame is met, Charlie becomes more aggressive and takes longer to walk past the desk. Failure to hide under the desk fast enough when Charlie enters the room will result in a jump scare. If you remember from earlier, I mentioned that Playtime with Percy is a very speedrunnable game because of how its progression system works. Well, this same philosophy applies to these post-night sections also, as you can actually speedrun them as well if you know the best way to go about doing everything. For example, once you reach the halfway mark in this minigame, everything becomes harder like I mentioned previously. However, this is only triggered once you actually lock in the third animatronic sale. You can actually avoid the difficulty spike entirely if you just get all the auctions to the correct prices, but don't lock in the deals. The correct bids will stay put, and you can just move on to the next animatronic. Then you can just lock in all the deals at the very end. This will trigger the difficulty spike, but only for a few seconds as you quickly lock in the rest of the deals. This makes getting a faster time on this post-night section significantly easier, alongside just making the whole thing easier in general. Not every post-night section has an easier strategy like this, but a few definitely do, which is really cool. As for my opinion on auction automation, I think it's really fun. I was a little confused when I played it for the first time, but I very quickly got it and have a lot of fun with it now. That little speedrun tip I mentioned, I actually learned that live on stream when I was in a Playtime with Percy charity speedrun battle with Raytoast on David Barron's channel. And by the way, Raytoast completely floored me. Still had fun though. I can't hate playing this game, even if I'm getting my ass handed to me. But yeah, for the first post-night section of the game, I think auction automation is a really solid introduction to the concept. Unfortunately, the next one of these is pretty easily the worst in the entire game, spoiler alert, but we have a whole new main game night to talk about before we get into that. It's time to jump straight into Tuesday. Tuesday is pretty much the same as Monday, but with the addition of 2 new threats to deal with. Charlie and Mother Moose are definitely a little more aggressive and harder to deal with now, but not by much. No, the real stars of Tuesday are Farmer Felix and the first of 3 playful poodles. We'll start by talking about Felix first, since he's definitely the main new threat presented on this night. Farmer Felix is a very broken animatronic in-universe. He's a ferret who's also a farmer, pretty self-explanatory, but for some reason they were trying to program him to play Simon Says with the kids at Percy's Playhouse. Apparently this programming attempt was a complete failure, and Farmer Felix started acting weird when trying to play Simon Says with the kids and anybody really. He's back up and running for this night after being absent from the previous one, and all he wants to do is walk around the building and play a good old game of Simon Says like the old times. Because that's pretty much all this guy wants to do, if you ignore playing his favorite game with him, he'll just kill you like any good Simon Says player. I guess the boss knew this was probably going to be an issue, because he left Nick a Simon Says machine that hangs from the top left corner of the room. Occasionally throughout the night, Farmer Felix will walk by the big window at the front of the office. In order to not get jump scared by him, you have to click the correct color on the Simon Says machine before he finishes walking by the office. To find out what color to click, you have to look at Farmer Felix's eyes to check and see what color they are. If they're yellow, click the yellow button. If they're red, click the red button, and so on. He's a relatively easy character to deal with, especially with this few animatronics active. But he really does make you stop doing whatever you're doing to check his eyes and make sure he's not going to kill you when he's done hitting the gritty behind the glass. The only super annoying thing with Felix is that you can't change the color on the Simon Says machine unless you put down all your electronics, which can sometimes put you in awkward positions if you really need to complete a task or deal with something on the cameras during the later nights. Overall though, he's a good, simple addition to the gameplay loop that feels pretty balanced even during the harder challenges at the end of the game. Design-wise, Farmer Felix is pretty good, if not a little boring. I like his big-ass goofy grin though, gotta say that. I think the biggest problem with his design might be his color palette. It's fine on its own, but there are like 2 other characters in this game with the exact same brown fur, green clothes color scheme, and both of those characters do it better. It makes the whole cast look kinda repetitive looking at them side by side though. Not a huge deal or anything, but it's definitely worth noting. The other threat introduced during this night is the first of 3 playful poodles that are slowly added to the gameplay loop as the nights progress. These 3 poodles are counted all as kind of the same character, but each one does a small, annoying mechanic that you have to keep track of. The playful poodle that's introduced during this night is very simple though. They will occasionally show up behind the glass and watch you. To get rid of them, All you have to do is complete a single task on the pal Percy. Don't complete a task fast enough, and they will cut off the power to your pal Percy, making it impossible to continue the night. I don't really have much to say about this mechanic, since it's so irrelevant this early in the game, but during the harder challenges, it can definitely be really annoying. Sometimes you gotta do a million other things before you can do another task, and then this fucker shows up at the worst time and screws you over. Or maybe you're left with only the stupid water task left, and the last thing you want to do right now is the stupid fucking water task, but then the playful poodle shows up and you're like, fuck, I guess I have to do the stupid water task now. Overall though, a decent addition to the game. The other two poodles are also pretty decent additions to the game, but we're not there yet, so calm down, and we'll talk about them eventually. Other than those two new additions, Tuesday is pretty much the same deal as Monday. The amount of task points you need to fill up the happiness bar increases from 30 to 35, but the night is still pretty easy to rush through if you focus on the tasks hard enough. That's pretty much it for Tuesday though. Let's move over to the next post-night section. Retro hijinks. Is that really what we're fucking calling this? Great fucking name, guys. Love you guys. I'm not gonna spend a super long time on this one, because it's pretty easily the worst out of all of these post-night sections, but we still gotta talk about it, so let's do it. Retro Hijinks has Nick trying to beat the high score on an old arcade machine before it gets taken away in the morning by staff. While you play the machine to try to beat the high score, occasionally a rustling noise will play in the background. When this happens, you have to turn around and flash Mother Moose with a light, who is trying to kill you, by the way. The actual arcade game you need to play is a pretty bare-bones shoot-'em-up space game that has you shooting UFOs and collecting hearts and power-ups to improve your chances at getting the high score. I don't even hate the premise of this minigame that much, I just dislike playing the shoot-'em-up segments, which is like 95% of this post-night minigame. I do like this genre of game normally, but I just find this bare-bones approach to it kinda boring. It's really not the game's fault though, considering it would be insane to put a fuck ton of resources into making this one random minigame super solid, but it's still probably the low point of the main campaign, at least for me. Once you're halfway to the high score, more difficult UFOs will try to attack you, and Mother Moose will become more aggressive, requiring you to flash her twice in a row to make her fuck off instead of just once. It's hard to say this minigame is actually bad, because it really isn't, but the gameplay variety of this post-night section, compared to the other ones we're going to cover later, is pretty drastic in my opinion. Future post-night sections has the player doing a wider variety of smaller minigames rather than focusing on one the entire time, which helps keep them interesting. This one just gets stale really fast, but thankfully it doesn't take very long to reach that high score and move on to Wednesday night. Like I said, I don't really have a lot to say about this minigame, because it's hard for me to even describe why I dislike it so much, but hopefully I somewhat got my point across here. With an arcade machine successfully blue-screened and a good day's sleep under Nick's belt, it's time for him to come back to Percy's Playhouse for Wednesday night, where I'm sure nothing bad will happen. Positive. Wednesday builds upon the foundation that we're all very familiar with at this point. The amount of happiness points required to beat the night is now 40 instead of 35, 2 new threats are added that we have to keep track of, and the pal Percy is beginning to look a little weird. I mean, just compare the pixel art from now to the first 2 nights. Bro has definitely seen better days, that's for sure. You think something's wrong with it? Nah, I'm sure it's fine. The 2 new threats introduced on Wednesday are another one of the 3 playful poodles, and the man himself, Percy Poodle. Both of these characters are tied to the newly added door mechanic that's added on this night. Nick can now close and lock the door from across the room with his telepathic mind powers that he definitely has. The new playful poodle will open the door and keep it open until you deal with them. All you have to do to make them go away is click on the door. If you ignore the poodle for too long and let them keep the door open, eventually they will open the door fully and you will not be able to close it for the rest of the night. This makes it so the other threat introduced on this night, Percy, can enter your office with nothing to stop him. Percy will occasionally show up in the window in front of your office and slowly make his way over to the door in phases. Once he's at the door, he'll wait a little bit before banging on it with his fists. Once Percy starts banging on the door, you have to stop everything you're doing to hold down the door shut with your mouse. This locks the door and prevents Percy from getting in. Eventually, he'll get tired of trying and leave. If you fail to lock the door on time, or already have the door permanently open thanks to the playful poodle, Percy will be able to get into the office and jump scare you. This is another mechanic that's really simple on its own, but once everything gets added to the gameplay loop, it becomes a really effective tool at throwing you off balance and making you shift your focus away from the actual task at hand. When it comes to my thoughts on Percy himself, I would have to say I'm a pretty big fan of his design. I think he serves as a very strong mascot for the game, and I promise you I'm not just saying that because he's an anthropomorphic dog with white eyes. He's like my white, fluffy, naked brother though, I gotta admit. Speaking of naked, Percy is the only character so far to not be wearing any kind of actual getup. I'm actually cool with this because I think it helps him stand out from the rest of the cast. And the way his fur is textured and thought out kind of distracts from the fact that he's naked to begin with. Really cute design, I like him a lot. Anyway, that's pretty much it for Wednesday. If I had to say anything, I think the lack of needing to use the cameras this late in the game is a little crazy. Both characters that require the camera to deal with them are introduced on the next night. But I personally think the order in which these characters are added could have probably been shifted around a bit. As it stands, you go from literally never using the cameras on one night to having to use it for 2 new characters for the first time on the next night, which does feel a little imbalanced. Thursday introduces the final of the 3 playful poodles, and their mechanic is literally just hide and seek on the cameras. This is a really easy to understand camera mechanic that I think could have slotted better on Wednesday. In this hypothetical scenario, I would move the playful poodle introduced on this night to the next night instead. That way you get to learn Percy's mechanic first before being introduced to the simple extension of it in the form of the playful poodle. That side effect is really just collateral damage in my hypothetical though. The real reason to do any of this would be to introduce the more simple camera mechanic earlier in the gameplay loop. Not a huge deal or anything, but I've thought about this for a while, and that's how I would personally handle the transition to including the cameras in the game. Anyway, at the end of Wednesday night, the power ends up dying at the playhouse, and that transitions directly into the next post-night minigame, Puzzling Power. With the power getting knocked out at the end of Wednesday's work shift, Nick has to make his way to the breaker room in order to restore power to the building. There are 6 rooms that you need to restore power to. Each of these rooms require 2 tasks to be completed in order to restore power to said rooms. These tasks include things such as avoiding lightning bolts from hitting you, completing mazes, moving blocks to their correct places, and collecting white dots on a screen. While you're doing this, occasionally you'll hear a rustling coming from behind you. When you hear that noise, you have to stop making progress from the tasks and turn around to defend yourself. Behind you is a completely dark room that you can use a flashlight to look around in. In this dark room, there are 4 big holes that a completely new animatronic we haven't dealt with yet can stick their body out of. Shine your flashlight on the hole they're in to make them go back to hiding. Keep doing this until all the rooms have fully restored power. Once you've restored power in half of the rooms, the minigames will become harder, and the animatronic rat will take 2 flashes to go back into hiding instead of 1. And that's pretty much it, but it's a fun take on this post-night formula. The variety in the minigames on display here is great, and it helps keep Puzzling Power more interesting than the previous minigame we talked about. At this point, you might be picking up that all of these post-night sections follow the exact same structure. You have to do some kind of task until you hear a noise, at which point you either need to hide or defend yourself before you can go back to making progress. I really like that all of these post-night minigames are set up like this, because it makes each one feel like it's building on top of the previous one, even if the actual task gameplay is always different. It's a clever way to make the post-night minigame feel different while also having the same gameplay mechanics at its core. So while every one of these minigames feels different, they also feel familiar in a good way. I just thought that was really neat. Anyway, the rat animatronic that we had to deal with during Puzzling Power is actually introduced into the normal night gameplay next, so I'll save my thoughts on him until we actually get to Thursday. I'd talk about him now, but I think he's very rude for making an appearance on one of these minigames before he's actually introduced in the main nights. Just ignore the fact that this animatronic has been stationary on the middle camera the entire game up until this point doing nothing. That's not important, don't worry. The rat can wait. Let's move on. Something that I've neglected to talk about up until this point in Playtime with Percy is its ranking system. This comes into effect at the end of every night and takes your completion time from both the actual night gameplay and the post-night section and gives you a score based on how fast you completed them. Not only does this give the game an insane amount of replayability trying to get the best possible rank, an S rank, it also gives you gameplay benefits during the story mode. The better rank you have at the end of the night, the more happiness points you'll be given to start the next main night section. This rewards you with a head start on the night and makes it so you have less tasks to do to fill the happiness bar back up than you normally would. It pretty much works the same way that the 2-hour head start does in FNAF 4 when you complete the Fun with Plush Trap minigame, except this time, the amount of head start you get depends on your performance during the previous night sections. This system is fucking brilliant and really encourages you to try and get better at beating each of the nights and the respective post-night sections as fast as possible. The better you do on the nights, the better you'll do on the future nights as well, thanks to the happiness head start. I'm no pro gamer or anything, so I've only ever gotten an S rank on the first 2 nights, but getting an S rank on the rest of the nights is definitely a goal of mine at some point. I'll definitely give it a real shot someday, but this video is already taking long enough to get finished, so today is not that day. I think they're also adding an even harder P rank in a future update to the game, So maybe I'll just have to throw my towel in now before shit becomes impossible. With that out of the way, we still have one more thing to go over before we can head straight into Thursday night. More story shit. At this point in the game, Nick has been working at this job for 3 nights now. Bro really must need that $250 fucking dollars, because my ass would have been out of there by now. Clearly, Nick is a stronger man than me, however, because he clearly does not give a shit. On Nick's way out of the building after restoring all the power to it, he finds a DVD in a jewel case that's completely unmarked and unlabeled. At this point, you're given the option to pick up the disc or leave it. Whatever you choose doesn't actually matter though, and the game plays out the same way regardless. But we'll pick up the disc for the sake of the narrative. Nick takes the DVD home and tries to get it to play, but unfortunately, he has the technical skills of an ant and can't figure it out. Eventually, he just gives up and heads to bed, but as soon as he's gone, the DVD finally begins to play. The TV shows us an old recall notice that probably would have been played during live TV broadcasts. The thing being recalled? The fucking pal Percy. That probably explains why the pixel art pal looked like he wanted to die during the previous night, huh? The recall notice offers full refunds to anyone who purchased the pal Percy and cites its dangerous tendencies around children if left or played with for too long as the reason. Kinda unfortunate that Nick didn't get to see any of this, considering he's been playing with the fucking toy for hours on end for days straight. But I'm sure he'll be fine, don't even worry about it. Once the DVD finishes playing, we're thrown right into the next night. It's time for Thursday, or as I like to call it, the night where the cameras finally become useful. At this point, you all know the drill when it comes to these main night gameplay sections. This time, the happiness bar requires 45 points in order to be filled up, and the pal Percy is looking extra fucked up today. I joke and say, I'm sure Nick is gonna be fine, but we already know he's screwed, so there's no reason to lie about it this time. But seriously, the pixel art on the pal Percy is starting to get even creepier looking. I thought I said this game wasn't scary. Did I lie? Nah, I'm sure everything's gonna be good, even though it very clearly fucking isn't. Anyway, the final 2 threats of the normal gameplay loop are introduced on this night, meaning Friday doesn't add a single new thing, and it's just one final test of skill before the game ends. This is part of the reason why I wish these 2 camera-based characters were introduced on separate nights. It feels weird to literally throw the entire concept of using the cameras at the very end. I already talked about that all previously though, so we'll leave it there and move on. We have more important stuff to talk about, like this fucking rat. That's right, just like I said, that rat from the previous post-night section is now part of the actual gameplay loop. This is Rowan Rat, and he's actually one of my favorite characters in Playtime with Percy from a design perspective. I like that he's only half an animatronic, I like his stupid eye falling out of his head, and I like that his jump scare has more blood than the entirety of Security Breach, or like 90% of FNAF games now that I'm thinking about it. Rowan Rat's whole deal is that he's a decommissioned animatronic similar to Foxy. This makes it even creepier that he's somehow fully active again and capable of digging around underground the playhouse. This ability of his to tunnel around is linked directly to how his mechanic actually works. When I first played this game, I just did not understand this mechanic at all, but I think I was just being stupid because I feel like it's pretty well explained, all things considered. Here's how he works. Rowan Rat will chill in the middle of the playhouse until he decides he wants to try to get into the office. When Rowan does decide to make an attempt, he will leave the middle room and go underground. You're given a radar system on your camera monitor that will detect if Rowan is trying to make his way to one of the 4 corner rooms of the building. Check this radar system to find out which of these 4 rooms Rowan is currently tunneling into. Once you know which room he's on his way to, you can either leave your camera on that room and wait for him to show up, or wait on the radar screen and look to see when the room he's tunneling towards turns red on the system. Once it shows red, it means he's in the room. From these corner rooms, Rowan can then tunnel into your office if left alone for too long. To get him to retreat back to his starting position, you have to shock him using the camera system. You're given a set amount of usable shocks each night, and have to use them wisely in order not to run out of shocks. This really isn't an issue during the campaign, but in Custom Hour, which is Playtime with Percy's Customite mode, you really need to maximize the limited amount of shocks you have. If left alone for too long and Rowan Rat is able to tunnel into your office, you will have a limited amount of time until he pops up in the room and jump scares you. As confused as I was with this mechanic at first, I have grown to like it a lot actually, and I think it meshes really well with everything else in the gameplay loop. I realize I've said that a lot in this video, but it's literally true. Every new mechanic that gets added to Playtime with Percy fills a very crucial role in the game and helps keep things interesting the whole way through. I say this because if you think the camera character doesn't really use the camera specifically well, then the other character that gets added this night is a lot more in line with what you'd think a camera character would be in a game like this. The final of the 3 playful poodles, like I mentioned previously, acts as a hide-and-seek character. You will occasionally see an exclamation sign above the camera icon on the UI. When this appears, it means the playful poodle is hiding somewhere on the cameras, and you have to check all of them to see where he is. This gives the game the fun movement of camera flipping like a regular FNAF game, giving balance to the more specific gameplay mechanic that Rowan Rat has. When you find the playful poodle on the camera, all you have to do is look at them for a short period of time, and they will leave. If you take too long to deal with them, your entire camera system will be shut offline, and you will no longer be able to deal with anything on the cameras. Kinda like how Balloon Boy makes it so Withered Foxy pretty much automatically wins unless you're super close to the end of the night, this playful poodle does the same thing, just for Rowan. Like I said, you go from never using the cameras to having 2 polar opposite style camera characters, so Thursday is a really big difficulty spike, especially on a first playthrough. I remember struggling a lot here on my first go around. On the whole though, this is when the gameplay loop gets really fucking good, and it only improves from here with the addition of custom hour characters later in the game. You're always doing something, you're always worrying about something, and it's a non-stop race to see how fast you can do it all. This is truly a pure adrenaline rush in the form of a FNAF style game, and it's so much fun. That's a huge reason why this is my favorite FNAF fan game. It takes the concept I like so much from FNAF 4, being the constant movement and worrying, and turns it into a more arcadey and fun experience that you can really grind for hours and hours. It literally feels like it was catered to me. That's how much I resonate with this gameplay loop. Anyway, enough glazing for now. We still have to talk about the next post-night minigame before we're finished with Thursday's work. At the end of Thursday's normal gameplay section, Farmer Felix walks by the glass one final time before malfunctioning and falling to the ground. For the next post-night section, Nick is tasked with repairing him before he gets shipped off to the person who purchased him during the auction section earlier in the game. So let's get Felix up and working again in the next post-night minigame, Farmer Serenade. Well folks, this is the final standard post-night section of the entire game. The one for Friday is literally just an extended ending for the game, so this is the final one that actually follows the format that Auction Automation put into place all the way back on Monday night. Thankfully, the post-night minigames end on a pretty high note, as Farmer Serenade is a pretty fun one. This minigame involves repairing Farmer Felix after a shutdown at the end of Thursday's regular night gameplay section. There are 4 different tasks you must complete before Farmer Felix can be up and running again, just in time to be sold off at the end of the week. The tasks are a gear minigame where you need to place the right gears in the right spots a few times, a crank minigame where you need to balance how fast you're winding the crank to prevent overheating, a Simon Says minigame where you need to play a few rounds, and a kinda confusing minigame at first glance that actually just boils down to matching numbers together a few times. While all of this is going on, the playful poodles will be trying to mess with you from the outside. You know the drill at this point. If you hear a noise, stop working on Felix and fend off the poodles by clicking on them. Then return to the task at hand. The halfway mark difficulty spike makes the poodles way more common and require multiple clicks to make them go away. These poodles will stack a lot as well, so you'll often have to get rid of multiple playful poodles every time you stop working on Felix. If you leave the poodles alone for too long, you lose and have to try again. I feel like the poodles may spawn a little too frequently towards the end, but it serves as a decent challenge and actually isn't too hard to deal with, so I wouldn't really change anything here. Once all 4 tasks have been completed, you have to reboot Farmer Felix's system by holding down a button. Once he has been successfully rebooted, the minigame and Thursday night end. Also, I would be doing Playtime with Percy a massive disservice if I didn't mention the beautiful, crispy success. It is truly impeccable, immaculate. So yeah, Farmer Serenade is pretty damn good, but it's sad that this is the final one of these post-night sections. All good things gotta end at some point though, including this game. Let's finish this. It's time for Friday night. Ignore the remaining runtime of the video, please. Just don't look into it too much. Friday, like I talked about a little bit earlier, is the exact same thing as Thursday, but harder. The number of happiness points needed is now 50, the pal Percy is still fucked up, and you're left off to fend everybody one last time before the credits roll. Because I already gave my flowers to this gameplay loop at its peak in the story mode earlier, I thought now would be a good time to go over Playtime with Percy's most prominent Easter egg, which is actually a whole new character. During any normal gameplay, you have the chance to encounter this game's equivalent equivalent to Golden Freddy, known as Yellow Mutt. I am a huge fan of this design. I really like how it looks like an actual older model of Percy, even though I'm not sure that's the intention. I'm also just a sucker for characters with golden color palettes. Sue me. If you are lucky enough to encounter them during your playthrough, they work pretty much the exact same way as Golden Freddy. If they jump scare you, they crash your entire game. You're probably wondering why I decided to bring up the existence of Yellow Mutt now instead of earlier. Well, and you're not gonna believe this one, I actually got this very rare Easter egg character myself. But not just during one of my random play sessions after I beat the game on stream. No, I got this character live on stream during Friday night on the day Playtime with Percy came out with the creator, Fazzy, in the fucking call. Unfortunately, I already knew about this character's existence thanks to snooping around the assets folder to make the stream's thumbnail, but my reaction is still pretty good. The tiny fucking puppies are...
Oh, what the fuck? What the fuck?
Give me the jump scare!
Are you fucking serious?
Give me the jump scare! That was awesome. I got that before I got actual Golden Freddy in FNAF 1, which I was trying to do for an hour straight.
Everyone's freaking out that we got Golden Percy.
That rocks. That fucking painting for the jump scare is really good. But yeah, cool as fuck experience that I just had to throw in there at some point in this video. Besides that though, Friday night doesn't really add anything super interesting to mention. Like, the gameplay loop is great, but I already told you that. At last, we can move on to the end of the game now. Once again, do not look at the remaining runtime of this video. Do not look at the remaining runtime of this video. Earlier in the game, Nick leaves the boss a voicemail about the animatronics kinda acting weird. This is important now, because after Friday night, Nick receives a response voicemail from the boss asking him if he can make sure Percy is all good before they come and destroy the building in the morning. This leads directly into the final post-night section that I mentioned earlier, which involves checking up on Percy and making sure he's all good. This leads into a sister location style repair sequence where you have to play a few short minigames that help check up on Percy. They're very simple, nothing much to talk about there. Upon finishing these checkups, Percy's battery fails somehow and he begins to start smoking. Not like cigarettes, he starts smoking out of his... whatever, you know what I mean. With very little time left before the entire place gets destroyed, Nick has to call the boss in order to figure out how to deal with the current situation. I don't think he's really been all that useful throughout the game so far, but like, fair enough, who the fuck else is he gonna call? The boss tells Nick to find a spare or substitute battery to put in Percy, which should stop the smoking problem and make him good as new again. Nick can't find a spare battery, but he does end up finding a substitute battery in the form of the pal Percy, which is designed to work as a battery for Percy in situations like this. With no other options, and a metaphorical fire under his ass, Nick uses the pal Percy, that is definitely not fucked up and evil at this point in the story, as a substitute battery for Percy. The substitute is accepted, and Nick is finally able to leave the playhouse once and for all. And just like that, after everything we've talked about, the credits roll on this phenomenal game. The boss and Nick finally reconnect, life is looking wonderful again, the animatronics all find new homes thanks to the auction, and what the fuck is happening with the credits? Tama lanky body? What the fuck? Hello? Is that a fucking arm? Okay, maybe we don't want the transfer to complete here, guys. Oh, and the pal Percy turned fucked up and evil. Who could have seen this come? Hello, everybody. Yeah from the hit YouTube channel, yeah here. If you couldn't tell by that abrupt ending, there is indeed more to this game, and more to this video. Everything from this point forward is insane spoiler territory, and will completely ruin the twist of the game if you've never played it before. If you want to play Playtime with Percy yourself because of my video, I recommend you stop watching here and come back after beating the game yourself. If you've already played the game or don't give a shit about spoilers, stick around because things are about to get juicy. But for those of you leaving, and for those of you staying I guess, yes, the title of this video was kind of a lie to preserve the twist of Playtime with Percy. The rest of the game isn't gonna make you shit your pants in fear or anything, but it definitely gets a little bit freakier from here on out. Game has twist, video has twist, it's kinda beautiful. Enough yapping though, let's see how Nick is gonna get himself out of this one. That is if he even can at this point. Maybe bro should have taken 2 more seconds to watch that fucking DVD, that's all I'm saying. Due to what just happened, Nick is forced to scurry away to somewhere else in the building to get away from the rogue pal Percy. He ends up finding a room he hasn't been in yet since he came back to do this job, but he can't see anything thanks to the lights being off. With few options at his disposal and a new threat on the rise, Nick quickly searches for and finds a light switch for this new room. He quickly flicks it on, only to see that he stumbled into the Playhouse's storage room, full of old and unused props from the establishment. This serves as the new office area for the boss fight that's about to unfold. We'll talk more about it and the very large elephant in the room in just a second. Nick, out of options once again, looks for something that might be able to help him in his current predicament. Thankfully, the thing he's looking for is right here in the storage room. Another pal Percy. That's right, thanks to this room collecting relics of a bygone era, there is a conveniently placed early model pal Percy, also known as the EM PAL. The EM PAL is also somehow connected to the power system of the building, and can be used to stop the now fused PAL Percy and Percy hybrid, simply known as PAL. Just like the PAL Percy we've been using for the entire game, this older model also has 3 minigames that you can play to fill up points on a happiness bar. The amount of points you need to fill up the bar is smaller now, only being 25, but you need to complete this bar 5 times to take down PAL for good. Each time you fill the bar, it gives a charge to PAL that will weaken him. Do this all 5 times, and PAL will be defeated, and the boss fight will end. These 3 minigames on the EM PAL are actually different from the 3 we've been playing up until this point, so the game quickly lets you try out all the new minigames before throwing you into the first phase of the boss fight. Unlike the previous minigames, these ones, on the whole, are a lot quicker and snappier to complete. But this is balanced out by not only how many times you have to do these minigames during the boss, but also just by how much more difficult the gameplay loop is compared to the base game. By the end of this, you'll see that there's a lot more going on here, and the faster minigames are definitely warranted. The only exception to this is the fishing minigame, which is just a slower version of the ball catching minigame from the base game, but it's balanced out by the other 2 being very quick to complete. Said other 2 minigames are one where you need to match 3 of the same shapes in a row, which is almost always accomplished by just moving one of the rows one time, making this a very easy task, and one where you need to complete a short maze that cycles through a bunch of different mazes every time you select it. Some of these mazes are harder than others, but the majority of the mazes are pretty straightforward. The little ball you control through the maze also controls really smoothly, making gliding around the mazes a breeze even if you mess up a few times trying to escape. Overall, I think I prefer the base game tasks a little more, but these ones are still really solid and definitely work better in the context of this boss fight than the original 3 tasks would have. With the 3 new tasks learned, a new objective understood, and a crazy Tamagotchi to defeat, it's time for Nick to take on his final work task and make it out of this crazy ass building alive. This is the boss night, Friday morning. Like I mentioned previously, PAL requires 5 charges in order to be defeated, and this boss fight is entirely structured around those 5 charges and the changes to the gameplay that happen after each successful one. You can kinda think of this boss fight like an entirely new FNAF fan game, but instead of the mechanics and characters being spread over 5 individual nights, they're instead all crammed into one singular boss night. Every charge completed adds new gameplay mechanics and characters into the boss fight, making it a super hectic and really hard bit of gameplay on your first go around. Like seriously, I spent way too fucking long trying to beat this on stream the first time. It really throws a lot at you very quickly. I've played this fight enough times now that it really isn't much of a challenge anymore, but it's definitely not a cakewalk by any means. If you do struggle in this fight, however, the game will offer you checkpoints after every single charge. That way you can pick up the game further into the boss fight if or when you die. I used this on my first go around, and it definitely helped out a lot. It would be way more demotivating if you had to start from the very beginning of this boss fight every single time you lost. The trade-off for using the checkpoints, however, is that your rank at the end of the night goes to complete shit, so just keep that in mind. Thankfully, a lot of the same ideas and mechanics are carried over from the base gameplay loop that help make understanding the boss gameplay loop way easier. Obviously, you still have the PAL for the tasks, and the PAL boy for the cameras, but some characters in this boss fight are literally just slightly tweaked versions of mechanics seen in the base game. This was definitely a smart call, because if everything here was completely new, it would be way more confusing and probably less fun. A good boss should make use of the skills you've learned throughout the entire game up until that point, and I think that Friday morning does a really good job at this while keeping things really fresh. And I mean really fresh, because it's time to stop ignoring this and finally talk about how this game is fucking 3D now. There have been small bits and pieces of 3D artwork scattered around Playtime with Percy before this point, but Friday morning clearly takes it to a whole new level. The entire office is 3D, all of the characters are 3D, and the whole camera system, including the rooms, were remade in this new 3D art style. Don't get me wrong, I adore the base game's art style for how charming it is, but I would have to say I probably prefer how the boss fight looks more. It takes the same basic concepts from the 2D art style and gracefully translates it to a super fun looking, low poly 3D art style. A lot of the textures still use the same art style seen in the base game too, making this a perfect blend of everything. I just think the environments are way more interesting to look at here compared to base games too. It's insanely cool to see the rooms on the cameras be covered in wires and holes, and it gives Playtime with Percy a much needed hint of horror that it was desperately missing before. I also just appreciate the attempt at some darker lighting here, especially in the office/storage room/whatever. The actual threats this time around are definitely designed to be a lot creepier too, being a bunch of Tamagotchi nightmare monsters with big eyes and creepy little feet and hands. We'll talk about them as they come up in the fight, but I do really appreciate the attempts here to make this boss fight stand out from the rest of the game, both visually and tonally. With all that being said though, and as much as I like this stuff, I still think I prefer the base game's gameplay over the boss night gameplay. I think this is probably an unpopular take, but I have a pretty decent personal reason as to why I feel that way, and we'll get into it way later after this fight is over. Do not get it twisted though. Friday morning's gameplay is still rock solid, and absolutely caters more to those who are really good at FNAF style games. I wouldn't really put myself in that camp, but regardless of that, I still think there's a lot to love here, even for the more casual and middle ground players. So, without further delay, let's get into the actual gameplay loop on display here, and talk about how it changes the further you get into it. Charge 1 is really just there to ease you into the new mechanics of the boss fight after briefly messing around with them during the soft tutorial phase. Because of this, there really isn't that much to worry about in terms of threats this early on, but even with that in mind, we do start off with 2 different characters to keep track of. Both of them are fairly easy to manage, but they definitely become more of a pain in the ass the further you get into the fight. The first of these threats is Tamalanky, the first of a group known as the Tama Terrors. The Tama Terrors are those Tamagotchi nightmare monsters I mentioned a little earlier, and each of them has a different mechanic that you have to worry about. Tamalanky's whole deal is that they literally grow out of your EM pal that you have to do tasks on the entire boss fight. Thankfully, they are really easy to deal with though. Just make sure you don't go too long without completing a task and you should be fine. The longer you go without doing a task, the more Tamalanky grows out of your EM pal, until it eventually jump scares you. It grows out in phases, and every task you do while it's already grown out a bit will revert it back a phase until it's completely gone again. This character is really only an issue on super hard stuff later in the game outside of this actual boss fight, so you can pretty safely ignore Tamalanky's existence for now. When more mechanics are added and everything's put on max difficulty, then Tamalanky becomes more of an issue. But for now, they're chill. Design-wise, the concept of a freakish nightmare growing out of your main line of survival in this situation is both insanely disturbing and really cool. Like the name would imply, Tamalanky has some creepy lanky limbs and super long antenna-like eyes. It makes them look almost bug-esque, which is funny considering one of the Tama Terrors we're going to talk about later is literally a bug. Regardless though, this is still a pretty cool design all things considered, but the cool concept alone definitely helps carry Tamalanky for me. While Tamalanky may not be much of a threat right now, that isn't easy to say for the other character added on Charge 1, Pal. This should have probably been obvious considering he is the main boss in this boss fight, but yes, Pal is out to get Nick and will stop at nothing to get what he wants. Pal, being the focus of all this, actually has 3 separate gameplay mechanics that aren't really connected to each other at all. This essentially means that Pal serves as 3 entire character mechanics bundled into one, which is pretty cool. It keeps the gameplay loop interesting because you never know which of the 3 attacks Pal is going to use at any given moment. Well, at least later in the fight that's the case. Pal's 3 mechanics are actually spread out throughout the boss fight as to not overwhelm the player with too many things to worry about at once right away. The first of these 3 mechanics is introduced right away here during the first charge. In the storage room office, there are 2 monitors attached to the wall in front of you. Occasionally, these monitors will display a message telling you to find Pal. You have to then pull up your cameras and look for Pal. Once you find him, he will show you an image of something that you need to find and give him. To find the item, you have to again flip around all the cameras until you see the item that Pal was showing you. Simply click on the item and Pal will leave. Failure to find the item fast enough will result in a jump scare and a game over from Pal himself. Pretty easy to understand mechanic, but it definitely gets a bit more hectic when you have all the other mechanics to worry about later. That's it for Charge 1, but you already know we can't end this section until we actually talk about the man himself, Pal. What a fucking design. It takes a relatively harmless looking character and completely twists them to fit the vibes of the boss fight perfectly. The black soulless eyes, the wires all around Percy's once clean fur, and of course, the pal Percy in the chest with the really cool expressive face controlling the animatronic body. The fact that this is literally the pal Percy we've been taking care of for the entire game too, just makes the fact that this is the final boss fight so much cooler. Like, for Playtime with Percy's entire runtime, you are literally staring at your final opponent for most of it. Something about that is just so cool to me. The whole concept is perfect and works so well as a final boss character for this game. Pal is probably one of the most popular characters to come out of Playtime with Percy, and that's for a damn good reason. We'll get even more characterization for Pal later in this boss fight, so I'll make sure to talk about that as it comes up. Overall though, fantastic final antagonist. With the first 25 happiness points accumulated and the first charge done and over with, it's time to move on to the next phase of this boss fight. Something that I haven't mentioned yet that sets this boss fight apart from the regular gameplay loop even more is how time is handled. In base game, you can spend as long as you want on each night and are encouraged to try to beat them as fast as possible. Friday morning, however, puts a fire under your ass and gives you a time limit instead of a timer that forces you to beat the boss under a certain amount of time. Each successful charge will reset the countdown, so you don't have to worry too much, but it can still cause problems if you aren't completing your tasks fast enough. It can really come down to the wire sometimes. Of course, if you fail to beat the charge in the given time, you lose and have to start over as if you die to any other animatronic. So, if you were wondering what was up with the time in the top left corner, now you know. With that clarified, let's get into the two new threats that we have to worry about for this second charge. For starters, the next member of the Tama Terrors is now active, and this one is a lot more aggressive than the last. Tama Broody is now active, and they will try to break into your office using pure force. They chill on the cameras for a little bit, but it's useless tracking them there because it's very obvious when they're about to attack. If your screen starts to shake and you hear a banging noise coming from either the left or right side of the room, that means Tama Broody is about to strike. Ignore this warning, and they will burst into your room from the side of the room the banging was coming from before jumpscaring you and ending your attempt. So, you're probably wondering, how the hell do you stop this thing from trying to kill you? Carts. Yes, carts. There are rollout carts on both sides of the storage room that you can now pull and hold in place. Once you stop holding them, they will roll back to their resting position. If you know that Tama Broody is about to attack, all you have to do is pull out and hold the cart on the correct side of the room to stop him from being able to enter. No fucking clue how a shitty little cart can stop this powerful monster from breaking down a wall, but I don't question these things anymore, you just gotta accept them. Design-wise, Tama Broody is probably on the more boring side, all things considered, but I do like that they just have two big-ass legs. It makes them look kinda goofy, but in a fun way. But they aren't very creepy looking compared to the other Tama Terrors. Still kinda neat though. The other character out of this charge actually might remind you of a character from the base gameplay loop. Or I should say, they might remind you of a group of characters. That's right, our favorite annoyances from the base game, the playful poodles, are back in the form of the Poodle Pals. Just like last time, they are introduced in separate sections of the gameplay loop and act as distractions and annoyances more than actual threats that can kill you. Design-wise, I like this iteration of these poodles way more than the originals. I think their freakier faces and taller proportions, mixed with the black wires from PAL, make them way more interesting designs. So, what does the first of these three poodles do for the gameplay loop? Expanding on the moving carts that are introduced during this charge, this Poodle Pal will occasionally jump down from the ceiling and linger in the office until they are dealt with. The longer they stay in the office, the more fucked up your controls become. The cameras will begin to send you to incorrect rooms instead of the ones you wanted, your scroll in the office gets inverted, and your EM Pal will become sluggish in the mazes and invert your controls on the other two tasks. To make sure none of this happens, or to fix this problem if you got to that point, simply drag out the cart on the side of the room the poodle's on to fucking kill them. I mean it too. Their little 2D ghost flies up in the air after you hit them with the cart. It is very funny and very satisfying. Don't be too sad though. Poodles don't die, they just respawn. Even after killing them, they will still come back over and over and over again throughout the remainder of the boss fight. Some great additions to the gameplay loop this phase, but 25 more happiness points have passed as we have another charge under our belt. Time for the third charge. Alright. Up until this point, the gameplay loop has been pretty manageable, but things are about to get a lot more hectic with the inclusion of one more new character and another one of the three mechanics for PAL that I mentioned earlier being added to the game. We'll start with the new PAL mechanic first before getting into our new Tama Terror. Thankfully, this PAL mechanic is a simple twist on something from the base game, locking the door. Occasionally during the boss fight, a very loud and obvious stomping sound effect will begin to play. When you hear this, it means that Pal is on his way to your front door that you can now lock and unlock just like the door in the office in the base game. Once Pal begins banging on the door, simply hold the mouse button down on the door to lock it and prevent him from getting in. Failure to do so fast enough will result in death. Obviously. Same mechanic from the base game pretty much, and another good example of things you learned from the previous gameplay loop carrying over to this one. I like it a lot. With that explained, now we can get into the next Tama terror that we have to worry about moving forward. Tama Opti. Tama Opti is another good example of gameplay ideas from the regular game being carried over and slightly tweaked for the boss knight. Tama Opti is the Rowan Rat equivalent of this knight, and works pretty much the exact same way. They start in the middle room before making their way to one of the 4 corner cameras. Once they make it to a corner camera, they will then make a sound effect letting you know they're waiting for you. You then have to react fast and check all 4 corners of the building to see which one Tama Opti is waiting in. Once you find them, simply shock them like Rowan Rat to make them reset back to the middle room. So pretty much this is just Rowan Rat without the radar system and a sound cue instead. I was really fucking bad at noticing the sound cue when I first streamed this game and died to this character a lot. But at this point, I recognize it pretty well. There's just a lot of other kinda similar noises going on in this boss fight, so I would often just get confused and lost, but it's definitely distinct enough to be able to call out after a little bit of practice. Good mechanic though, just like Rowan Rat. In fact, both of the camera characters from the base game were so good that they got remixes in this boss fight. But we'll get to the other one of those in a little bit. When it comes to Tama Opti's design, I'm a sucker for characters with creepy little tentacle arm things like this, and I think the huge singular eye on the screen is probably the best use of the Pal Percy screen that any of the Tama terrors have. When I think of this group of characters, my mind always defaults to this guy, so I think they stand out pretty well among the group. But yeah, good gameplay additions, cool character, cool charge. Just like that, another 25 happiness points are built up, and we get to unleash the 3rd charge. Upon the completion of the 3rd charge, Pal, connected to a wire and separated from his new animatronic body, comes down to tell Nick a message. First off, cool voice acting. This is exactly what I thought this little shit would sound like. Second, this little moment in the boss fight adds so much charm to the whole thing, and gives the player a better idea of Pal's motivations than they may have had before. Sure, they're an evil fucked up toy pet, but they're still a toy pet at their core. Pal really just wants a friend for life, even if that means going to the most messed up lengths possible to make sure that happens. I find that characterization really cool, and it definitely fits the tone of Playtime with Percy very well. With Pal out of the storage room again, and 3 charges behind us, it's time to get into the 4th charge and tackle the new threats that await. We excuse this sudden interruption to bring you Tamagotchi Horror Dog. Yeah, so I didn't really know where to put this, since I never actually got this Easter egg character myself, but Tamamunchi is a thing that does exist. The FNAF wiki has some bullshit explanation on how to get it, but it's wrong. I needed footage of this character, since I literally didn't have any, so I just asked Fazzy to send me some, along with an explanation of how they spawn. It works like this. At the start, and only the start of Friday morning, the game rolls for the number 1 out of 10,000 once. If it doesn't hit the number 1, the game goes on like normal. But if it does roll a 1, then Tamamunchi will be placed in the corner of the storage room for the boss fight. They don't actually do anything, but they're chill as fuck, so it's okay. I genuinely love this design so much. The stupid teeth at the top of the Pal Percy body is really goofy, and the little face on the screen just brings it all together. So yeah, update your wikis or whatever. On to Charge 4 for real this time. Charge 4 starts off with the monitors tweaking out thanks to Pal taking control of them. This really doesn't mean anything gameplay-wise, but it's a cool visual detail that shows the lengths Pal is willing to take to get what he wants. I briefly mentioned earlier that one of the Tama terrors is a bug, and that Tama terror is added during this charge. Tamarochi, which is actually a group of smaller Tama terrors that are all labeled under the same name, will slowly crawl out of the massive hole in the ceiling throughout the remainder of the night. Shortly after Tamarochi crawls out of the hole, they will begin to make their way to the sides of your screen and linger there until dealt with. To get rid of Tamarochi, all you have to do is grab them with your mouse and throw them away, which is a really fun idea for a mechanic. If too many Tamarochi stay on your screen for too long, they will all come together and jump scare you. You also can't get rid of them unless you have all your electronics down, meaning you have to stop what you're actively doing to get rid of these bugs. Tamarochi has a very simple design, but given that they are literally just supposed to be annoying bugs, I think it works. When you're in the heat of the moment and the boss gameplay gets super hectic, Tamagotchi is both a fun little thing to throw around and also an insane annoyance that pulls you away from making progress. I think it strikes a pretty good balance, all things considered, and Tamagotchi definitely adds some fun chaos to the existing gameplay. The second threat out of this charge is actually the next of the Poodle Pals. This Poodle Pal is the twist on the camera Playful Poodle from the base game that I mentioned a little earlier. Same idea as that Playful Poodle. You will be alerted if they're hiding on one of the cameras, and you have to check all of them to find out where they are. Once you find them, all you have to do is look at them for a few seconds and they will go away. Unlike the Playful Poodle with a similar mechanic, this Poodle Pal will not kill your cameras if you take too long to find them. Instead, they will mess up your vision and lock your carts. So not only do you get distracted by the annoying visual filter, you also literally can't defend yourself from two of the other threats if you don't find this Poodle Pal fast enough. Simply finding them on the cameras and making them go away will revert these negative side effects and things will go back to normal. Like I said earlier, both Rowan Rat and the Camera Poodle's mechanics were so good, they just got reused here. Simple as that. Oh, look at that. The happiness bar is full again, and we're finally on the last charge. It's time for the home stretch. The final charge starts off with a short cutscene of Pal banging on your door. He's getting desperate now and knows it's time to pull out his final trick, the last of his 3 mechanics. Just like that cutscene from earlier in the fight, Pal will occasionally drop down from the ceiling and try to mess with you. When he drops down, he will display a cup game on his screen where you need to pay attention to the cups to see which one has the ball underneath it. Click on the correct cup when he finishes and he will leave. Click the wrong one and he will laugh and jump scare you. Seems pretty easy to deal with on paper, but by the time it's added to the gameplay, so much shit is going on that it's sometimes hard to pay attention to the cups and you end up messing up. Pal can come down when you have the camera or the EM Pal up as well, which is likely blocking his screen and the right cup to follow, meaning you have to put everything down to make sure you don't mess up and click on the wrong cup. The final Poodle Pal is also added during this charge, and it's by far the easiest one to deal with, thankfully. Randomly throughout the night, the 2 monitors connected to the wall will display a small laughing poodle instead of the normal nothingness. Simply click on the screens to turn the TV off again and make the poodle go away. Leaving them around for too long will result in your door not being able to lock and your electronics being inaccessible. Very simple mechanic, but it acts as a nice cherry on top of this long and complicated ass boss fight. At this point, the game has thrown everything at you, and it's up to you to survive long enough to see the end of this. The boss night is such a fun and chaotic gameplay loop that absolutely deserves its flowers. It really pushes your knowledge of both the base game and everything you've learned in the previous charges to the absolute fullest to form a solid ass ending to this solid ass game. Once you fill up the happiness bar for the final time, all of the charges will be complete and the building will go on shutdown preparation mode. This dims the light and prepares to shut down everything completely, but you still have to survive for 70 more seconds until that actually happens. The EM Pal is no longer usable. You literally just have to survive until the countdown is over in one final test of skill for everything this game has taught you up until this point. Once the countdown is over, the screen fades to black as the electricity powering all of Pal's allies finally goes out thanks to the charges. And just like that, the Friday morning Pal boss fight is officially over. Jesus Christ. What a phenomenal ending for this game. It really takes an already great experience and truly takes it up a notch to legendary status. The art style change, the tone shift, the remix and new gameplay mechanics, it's all insanely good. I didn't even mention the surprisingly amazing music for this boss fight either. It changes and builds up with every charge you go through, and really ties the whole thing together. The upload of this song, Tama Terrors, is almost at 900,000 views, and it 100% deserves that. Great shit. The other music in this game is also pretty great, so I recommend giving at least some parts of the OST a listen if you're curious. Or just play the damn game and hear them the way they're intended to. I don't care, up to you. Well, now that we're finally done talking about all that, how about we wrap up this story and see how Nick is doing after that crazy ass boss fight? I'm definitely curious, so let's do it. Nick, understandably freaked out by this whole situation, wonders to himself if he did everything right and if Pal has been truly defeated for good. Spoiler alert, he's still fucking alive. Whoops. Pal bursts through the front door of the storage room one final time to have a short conversation with Nick. This conversation mostly just consists of Pal complaining that he and Nick aren't going to be best pals forever. Nick tells him to fuck off, but unfortunately, that was the incorrect answer and Nick gets tied up by a bunch of Pal's black wires. Things are looking bad. Pal and the rest of the Tomateers are watching Nick suffer. Pal begins to maniacally laugh, and it doesn't seem like Nick has any more options left for survival. That is, until you remember this building was supposed to be demolished Friday morning. Given that it is indeed Friday morning right now, it should only be a few more seconds until a wrecking ball breaks right into the building and hits Pal, and there it is. The impact of the wrecking ball sends Pal flying out of Percy's body and onto the floor, taking away the last of his power over Nick once and for all. Pal begs to Nick to come over and save him, but he kind of just awkwardly leaves the now destroyed building and ignores him. Fair enough, honestly. I mean, that thing did just try to fucking kill him, so yeah. The boss, surprised to see Nick in the building's rubble, calls out to him. Nick, understandably, freaks the fuck out because of what just happened. And the boss has to explain to him what the player already knew from the DVD recording that Nick never got to actually watch. The boss offers Nick a bite to eat, and the two of them leave the destroyed Percy's playhouse for good. Finally, after everything that's happened, we finally see the credits roll for real this time. The end. The credits are actually really cute and have little drawings showing what happened to each of the auctioned off members of Percy's Playhouse gang. Mother Moose ended up at like a rave party somehow. Farmer Felix got turned into a mini golf prop. Charlie Cat gets sent somewhere, I don't think I can legally say, and both Rowan Rat and the Playful Poodles end up becoming homeless. At least the Poodles are gonna get adopted. Rowan does not have that luxury. Finally, we see one final picture of Pal, still alive, but helpless and weak, laying in the rubble. He has officially lost. But the takeaway here is that he's still alive. So get hyped for Playtime with Percy 2, Pal's Revenge in 2032. Oh, and my name is also in the special thanks. Yeah, I'm just that cool. I'm a cool guy. I'm a really cool guy. Man, I don't even know what else I can say about this game that I haven't already said at this point. It's wildly imaginative and truly a one-of-a-kind experience. It's also the most fun FNAF-style anything I have ever played, so that probably has a lot to do with it. I really didn't expect this video to be longer and more in-depth than a college thesis paper, but life is funny like that sometimes. This is one of my favorite games ever though, and I'm glad I was able to make something this in-depth on it. Seriously, thanks for watching, everybody. Don't leave just yet, though. We still have a little bit more Playtime with Percy to talk about before we are truly done here. Upon beating the main campaign mode, the bonuses menu, the custom hour mode, the endless mode, and free play are all unlocked. Free play just lets you replay specific parts of the campaign, like the post-night sections again, so I don't have anything to say there. But the other modes, especially custom hour, have a ton of stuff I want to talk about. This includes 4 more characters to go over and a whole bunch of other cool shit. So, let's not waste any time and dive right into the extras. Alright, I don't have much to say about this stuff, but it's definitely worth quickly bringing up regardless. The bonuses menu is pretty much just like an extras menu in any other FNAF game, except this time there's way more stuff than you'd probably expect. We have the standard things like pictures of all the animatronics, all the jump scares, and a way to rewatch all the cutscenes from the game. On top of that though, we have a section that lets you look at every camera environment featured in the game, complete with toggles for every character who can appear in said environments. Since the cameras aren't really all that useful for most of the characters, it's cool that the game gives you a place where you can still see what all the characters look like on all the cameras. There's complete sections for both scrapped and behind the scenes development content, letting players take a peek behind the curtain to see how many of Playtime with Percy's mechanics, characters, and ideas came to be. I always love when games put shit like this in as little extra content. It really shows all the work that goes into making even the smallest of details in a project like this. Finally, the bonuses menu features both a gallery and an art contest winner section, where you can look at both official and fan art made for the game. This is all tied in a nice little bow with the contributors page, where you can see every single person who helped make this game a reality. Although, I think y'all might want to change Costa Vesta's profile art for this. They're the GOAT, don't get me wrong, but something tells me having a drawing of a Goomba with Mario's hat in a Steam game might be a little risky. Not gonna lie, just a little risky. Well, that's pretty much everything related to the bonuses menu. However, there is still one more thing featured here that I've neglected to mention yet: Endless Mode. Endless Mode is the only option featured in the bonuses menu that actually lets you play the game, and in a new and exciting way at that. Just like the name implies, Endless Mode lets you play both the normal and boss night gameplay loops forever. The goal is to try and get the highest number of points possible, which is achieved by completing tasks on the Pal Percy. The further you get into an Endless Mode run, the more aggressive the animatronics become. It just gets harder and harder as you go on, so it's a really good test of skill for both of the gameplay loops. Playtime with Percy even features a working online leaderboard where you can see the top scorers in both of the endless modes. Because I'm playing on the Steam beta version of the game for this video, these leaderboards are pretty dead, but still fully functional. I could have gotten a single point on either of these leaderboards and still placed in the public top rankings. I like this mode as an idea, and I think a lot of people have gotten a lot out of it, but I don't think it's for me personally. I think it's a cool extra, but I prefer to play this game with set goals in mind that can be reasonably beat. If I was playing on the Game Jolt version of Playtime with Percy right now, the idea of placing in the top endless mode rankings would be a joke. Love that it's an option though, and I'm sure countless sweats have put hours and hours into this. I'm glad it's in the game. One last thing before we move on to the final section of this video. Playtime with Percy features a complete set of skins for the pal Percy that you can quickly switch between by clicking on the pixel face on the title screen. These are really cute, and there's one for every single main animatronic in the game, minus the Tama Terrors. There are even 4 unlockable skins for the 4 unlockable custom hour characters. Speaking of, now that we're done with all the extras, I think it's time we finally start talking about said custom hour mode, and all the new additions that come with it. This is the final home stretch. Strap in. As the name implies, Custom Hour mode is literally just Playtime with Percy's version of the Custom Night mode seen in most classic FNAF games. Not only does this mode feature the 4 unlockable animatronics I already mentioned, it also has a bucket load of features you can mess around with alongside a fully fledged Custom Hour for both the base and boss fight games. I'm not going to bother getting into every little feature and setting you can toggle here, but pretty much anything you can think of that could potentially be messed with can be messed with here. The main additions to this mode that I want to touch on, besides the new characters, are Aggressive Mode and the Pal Percy Anger AI. Starting with Aggressive Mode, in the Boss Custom Hour, all this does is make the characters react to things faster and just be more aggressive in general. However, in the normal Custom Hour, Aggressive Mode actually changes the mechanics of a few characters to make them harder outside of the general aggression buffs from the toggle. This is something I was not aware of until I was doing one of the pre-made challenges that Custom Hour features. Each of the 2 Custom Hours featured here have 3 built-in challenges to complete. One with every base animatronic on 5, one with every base animatronic on 10, and one with every animatronic, including the unlockable ones, on 20, aka Max Mode. However, there's a bit of a twist regarding one of these pre-made challenges that I somehow just never noticed when I started playing it. The challenge with every animatronic on 10 actually has the aggressive mode toggle turned on. So, I was extremely surprised when the base game animatronics were pulling stunts I had never seen before. Eventually, I figured out what was going on, but it was a cool little moment of not knowing what the fuck was happening. If you're curious what these aggressive mode changes are, here's a quick rundown. Percy now bangs on the door twice before leaving instead of once. He will get to the door, bang on it, then wait at the door a little longer before banging on it again. This means you have to hold the door shut for twice as long every attack cycle. Mother Moose and Charlie Cat now have less obvious tells when they're about to enter the office, eliminating the directional sounds of the vents entirely. Rowan Rat just gives you less reaction time, nothing super crazy. But Farmer Felix is by far the biggest difficulty spike. Now, when Farmer Felix walks behind the glass, he will always change his eye color in the middle of his walk. This means you have to pay extra attention to him to see when he changes his eye color so you can press the correct button on the Simon Says machine. Farmer Felix was already kind of an annoying little thing to briefly pay attention to, but now he requires even more brain power to deal with. All of these are really fun changes though, and I think giving threats updated mechanics on harder difficulties is a super cool idea that more games should try and implement in the future. The other thing I want to mention here is the Pal Percy Anger AI mechanic. This is something that's toggled on for the base game Max mode, and it makes dealing with Pal Percy significantly more annoying. When turned on, your Pal Percy will begin to get mad at you if you leave them alone for too long. This will not only trigger the other animatronics to slowly increase their AI levels, but it also makes completing the Pal Percy tasks take even longer than normal. The ball throwing and water minigames take longer to complete, and the food catching minigame requires you to catch 4 pieces of meat instead of 3. This really encourages you to stay on top of your Pal Percy tasks to avoid having to deal with the harder versions later on. Those are just 2 examples of some really cool stuff that Custom Hour lets you mess around with, and I applaud the dev team for including so many options here to shake up the normal gameplay. With that said though, there is really only one more thing I want to talk about here before wrapping all of this up, being the brand new unlockable characters. Each of the 4 unlockable characters are unlocked after beating the Custom Hour challenges associated with them. For base game, that would be the challenges Flocko Poodles and Summer Day, and for the boss fight, that would be Possum Peril and Festive Friends. I don't really have much to say about each of these challenges individually, but the first 3 are fairly easy. The last one though, Festive Friends, is a fucking pain in the ass for me. Even with the lack of updated mechanics for the boss characters on aggressive mode, that gameplay loop is just so much more complicated and tough to navigate that even just making everybody move and react faster is enough to give me some trouble. This would probably be a good time to bring back the thing I said earlier about how I like the normal nights in this game more than the boss fight stuff. The main reason for that is literally just because I am significantly worse at the boss fight stuff than I am the base game. It is simply a skill issue on my part. For reference, I was able to beat the max mode of base game within a few hours of trying. Within a shorter but still very similar time frame, I was barely able to make a dent in the boss fight max mode. It is truly for the FNAF sweats out there, but not me. I prefer the base gameplay loop because I feel like I have a better grasp on it and enjoyed making actual progress during the harder challenges. Maybe at some point, I'll dedicate a serious amount of time to try to get really good at the boss max mode, but I don't really feel the need to do that right now. I'm sure I might end up enjoying the boss stuff more than the base game if I got really good at it someday, but the chaotic simplicity of the base gameplay loop just speaks to me more personally. I just wanted to clarify that because I know a lot of people prefer the boss stuff over the normal gameplay. One thing regarding all of this that I have to give Playtime with Percy props for is just the idea in general of having 2 different max modes that cater to 2 different skill levels. I'm no FNAF champion or anything, but I was still able to beat the base game's max mode. It's not super easy or anything either, but beating it does feel more reasonable for more casual and middle ground players than a lot of other max modes do. This is then perfectly balanced by the boss max mode being way harder, giving those who are actually good at these things a real challenge to sink their teeth into. You get the best of both worlds here, and I respect that a lot. Anyway, back to Festive Friends. It's not the hardest thing ever or anything, but it definitely gave me way more trouble than any of the other non-max mode pre-made challenges that Playtime with Percy has to offer. With all that said though, the only thing left to do here is actually talk about these new characters so we can finally wrap this video up for good. Let's do this. The first unlockable character, Sunny Sheep, is unlocked after completing the Flocko Poodles challenge. Upon beating the challenge, the game then transitions to this really cool pre-rendered 3D Jack-in-the-Box screen. You have to crank up the box to reveal the new character you just unlocked, which in this case is Sunny Sheep. Sunny Sheep is another threat that you have to deal with in the office. When activated, she will chill in the middle of your office in a powered down state. Randomly throughout the night, Sunny Sheep will activate and stand up. Every time she does this, her mask falls off her face and hits the floor. The mask will always land in one of 3 different places around the office. Once this happens, a beeping noise will slowly build up in the background. Leave her be for too long, and the beeping will become louder before eventually resulting in a Sunny Sheep jump scare. To prevent this, simply find her mask in the office and drag it up to her face again. Once the mask is successfully locked back on the face, Sunny Sheep will return to a powered down state. The mask cannot be interacted with unless you have both of your electronics down. So similar to Farmer Felix, you have to stop everything you're doing to make progress to make sure you don't die to Sunny Sheep. I think this is probably one of my favorite mechanics in the entire game, despite how basic it is. The sound design really puts the pressure on the situation and makes you want to deal with her as soon as possible, which is just perfect because she really doesn't give you that much time to put her mask back on. Her jump scare noise also sounds like one of those stupid screaming goat memes, which is kind of perfect. Design-wise, this is also one of my favorite characters in the entire game. The white, pink, and green color palette looks amazing in my opinion, and I am such a sucker for animatronics with exposed endoskeleton faces. It just makes them look so much cooler. Sunny Sheep also probably has one of the most solid outfits out of the entire cast, which is definitely worth mentioning. Overall, peak character and a fantastic addition to the game. Next up is Helios, unlocked by completing the Summer Day challenge. Helios is that sun face thing that you see in the corner of the stage camera during regular gameplay. However, the sun itself isn't actually an animatronic. It is indeed just a prop. The character of Helios is actually a spare endoskeleton that chills in the playhouse and uses the sun prop as a mask when they move around the building, which is a really cool concept. Design-wise, as much as I love this character, I think the endoskeleton body kinda doesn't commit to what it's going for enough. It's clearly supposed to be fucked up and broken in some way, given the extra arm and wooden plank across its chest, but it still looks far too clean and orderly at the same time. I also think the body in general is kind of just boring shape and structure wise. However, the overall concept and the sun mask alone help balance all of this out for me. I still really mess with Helios, even if I think he could be a little better. Like, he's an A tier design, he probably could have been an S tier design. When it comes to how Helios works in terms of gameplay mechanics, I think they're probably one of the weaker additions, especially this late in the game. Helios is essentially just Tama Opti, but for the base gameplay loop. They make a noise, go to one of the 4 corner cameras, and you shock them to send them back to where they started. The only meaningful change here is that Helios will move to a second corner room before attacking, giving you more opportunities to defend yourself from them. If they make it to the second corner room and you shock them from there, they will go back to the first corner room they entered. From that point, you just deal with them as normal. If they make it to the second corner room without being shocked on time, Helios will enter the office from the ceiling and jump scare you. Helios pretty much just serves as more camera busy work to worry about, which, don't get me wrong, does work in the gameplay loop. I just wish it was something a little more creative. I think there are camera mechanics that could have been added that aren't just Tama Opti again, who is already a modified version of Rowan Rat, a character already in the existing gameplay loop. It's pretty uninspired, but it does get the job done, making the player use the cameras even more. Overall, cool character design with some minor flaws, and an effective but derivative gameplay mechanic. With that covered, it's time to move on to the boss night unlockable characters. Alright, so we kinda can't talk about this first boss custom hour character unless we talk about this thing. This is Viola, the original first boss custom hour character. I think they were like a fan character or something that was made before the game came out that was turned into an official character for some fucking reason. I don't even know what they're supposed to be, maybe like a rabbit or something. Regardless, even when they were still in the game, they were probably my least favorite character design. They always felt extremely out of place in the universe of Playtime with Percy, and also didn't really fit the vibe of the boss night, like, at all. Like, why the fuck is there a pal Percy in their face? Bro really thought she was part of the team. She really thought she was one of the Tama Terrors. Anyway, at some point, Viola was removed from the game for reasons in an update. So obviously, Viola needed a replacement. This replacement would come in the form of the peak character design, Polly Possum. This might be my favorite character design in this entire game, guys. I'm not gonna lie. They no longer try to fit into the Tama Terrors as some weird reject. They look way more like the other characters already featured in the game. And also, possums are just fucking awesome. Polly Possum also says bye-bye when they leave the office, which is peak character writing. I don't see Viola doing that. Speaking of leaving the office, I might as well talk about their actual mechanic now. Polly Possum is kind of like a weird remixed version of Mother Moose from the base gameplay loop. She will slowly start to come out of the hole in the ceiling in different phases. Once she fully comes out of the hole and starts to laugh at you, you have to put all your electronic tools down in order to protect yourself. If you have a tool up for too long when she comes out of the hole, she will jump scare you and end your night. Once again, another character that is designed to make you stop using your tools for progress, but it's manageable enough and doesn't really make the gameplay loop all that much harder. I'd actually say that's a trend with these two new boss characters, because neither of them are that hard to deal with, since the gameplay loop was already hard enough without them. Regardless, Polly Possum is a great addition to the game, and is once again, a peak character design. It's hard to imagine this game without them now. Also, one last thing, I think Polly actually has more visual phases of coming down out of the hole than Viola had, which makes the character a lot more readable than the previous version. TLDR, Polly Possum is goated, and we won. Finally, we have the last custom hour character that Playtime with Percy has to offer, Truman. Unlocked by beating the quite difficult Festive Friends boss night challenge, Truman is a tall, blue bird wearing a festive scarf and Santa hat. He looks cracked out, and that's the best way to describe his design. He's definitely one of the more unsettling designs this game has to offer. I mean, just look at that face. Bro is definitely up to some illegal shit. I do not trust him. He's pretty fun though, and I like him being the final custom hour character. Something about how weirdly out of place he is, while also feeling realistic enough to exist in the universe, works really well. I don't really have much to say about him though, and I think his mechanic is also really simple too. Basically, on all 4 screens in the room, the 2 on the wall, and your 2 devices, there's a random chance during the night that Truman's Christmas advertisements can appear. When you hear the Christmas music playing from somewhere in the office, you have to check all the monitors in your devices to see which of them is currently playing the ad. Once you figure that out, simply click on the ad to make it go away. Failure to do this fast enough will result in a jump scare from Truman. And that's it. That's the mechanic. I think it's effective at making you act fast, but it's still very conceptually simple. Still though, I like how weird and freaky Truman is, and I think he fits as a nice ending point for Playtime with Percy's extra content. That's basically everything that Custom Hour has to offer. You can get a few little stickers and rewards for beating the max modes, but outside of that, that's the end of Playtime with Percy. Trust me, I've been here for so long at this point that I don't believe myself either. Let's wrap this up. For good this time. I was originally going to make this video around a year ago, closer to when the game actually came out, but I kept pushing it off in favor of working on other projects. By the time I actually did get around to making this video that you just finished watching, I had so much more to say about Playtime with Percy than I originally thought I did. This project has slowly grown into this over the course of a year, but it's finally done. Playtime with Percy is one of the most creative, inventive, and fun video games, not only in the FNAF space, but also in general. While I never expected to have this much to say about it when I decided to make this video over a year ago, I'm glad that this ended up becoming as big as it did. A game of this quality that speaks to me on such a personal level deserves a big blowout deep dive like this one, and I'm so happy I was the person able to make it happen. With that, I think I've said everything I wanted to say about Playtime with Percy. Huge shout out to the entire development team, y'all genuinely crushed it. So, I guess there's only one more thing left to say. I've been yeah, and I'll see you all next time. Okay. Hopefully that satisfies sponsor Parrot. The last thing I need right now is an actual lawsuit. It's been so long, I'm sure you probably forgot this plotline was even a thing in this video. Anyway, bye everybody!